Summer, 1944. A hill outside Pisa, Italy. A 23-year-old American sergeant named Leon Weckstein lies in the grass with a pair of binoculars, and in his hands, more or less, is a decision. Somewhere behind him, artillery batteries are waiting for his voice on the radio. German observers are believed to be hiding in the white marble tower floating in his lenses, using it to direct fire onto American soldiers. One call from Weckstein, and the guns erase it. He watches the tower for hours through a 20-power scope, hunting for the flash of enemy optics, a sniper's silhouette, anything that would justify the order. It leans. It shimmers in the July heat. Decades later, in his memoir, he would remember searching for the words to call in the strike and finding that they would not come. The tower was simply too beautiful to kill. He never made the call. Leon Weckstein thought he had spared a monument. He had no idea he had spared a dying patient. Because the leaning Tower of Pisa was not just leaning, it was falling. So slowly that nobody could see it, and it had been falling, millimeter by millimeter, for 800 years. This is the story of the most famous mistake in architecture, a mistake that swallowed tons of concrete under a dictator's orders and only got worse. A mistake that closed for the first time in 8 centuries because a tower just like it dropped dead without warning. A mistake that nearly toppled one September night in the hands of the very people trying to save it. And here is the promise. By the end, you will know the backward secret this tower kept for 800 years, why everything that was wrong with it turned out to be armor, and why the thing that finally saved it was not adding anything at all. The mistake was made before the tower was even a tower. In 1173, the city of Pisa was rich, arrogant, and in a hurry. Its merchant fleet ruled the western Mediterranean. Its rivals, Florence and Genoa, watched with envy, and its cathedral square needed one final piece, a bell tower taller and more beautiful than anything its neighbors owned. The builders laid a foundation just 3 meters deep. Under it, they believed, was solid ground. Under it, in reality, was the buried bed of an old river. Layers of soft clay, fine silt, and water. On one side of the circle, the ground was slightly stiffer, on the other, slightly softer. The tower would weigh over 14,000 tons. It never had a chance. By 1178, with only 3 floors built, the south side had already begun to sink. You can still read the panic in the stone. The masons started making columns and arches on the sinking side slightly taller, trying to level each new floor against a base that would not stay still. And then, the tower got lucky in the strangest possible way. War broke out. Pisa threw itself into decades of fighting with Genoa, Lucca, and Florence, and construction simply stopped. For almost 100 years, the half-finished tower stood abandoned on the square, a 7-story stump of expensive marble leaning quietly into the wet ground. That pause saved it. Engineers today agree. Beneath the abandoned stump, the soft clay was slowly compressing, squeezing out water, growing firmer year by year under the constant weight. In the simplest terms, the tower was training the ground to hold it. If the builders had finished the tower on schedule, the ground would have given way, and Pisa's bell tower would be a footnote, a pile of medieval rubble. Its first rescue was an accident. Remember that. It will not be the last time doing nothing works better than doing something. In 1272, the builders came back, looked at the lean, and made a decision that still makes engineers smile. They kept going, but at an angle. New floors were built tilted against the tilt, columns taller on one side than the other. The tower does not just lean, it bends. Seen from the right spot, it curves like a banana, a 200-year argument between architects and gravity, frozen in marble. In 1372, 199 years after the first stone, they hung the bells and walked away. The tower stood 56 meters tall, 4 degrees off vertical, and completely, magnificently wrong. Then came the strangest part. Nothing happened. For 5 centuries, the tower simply leaned, sinking about a millimeter further every year. Too slow to alarm anyone, fast enough that, on the scale of centuries, it was a countdown. Generation after generation of surveyors climbed the plaza with their instruments, measured the angle, wrote it down, and quietly passed the problem to their grandchildren. The numbers only ever moved in one direction. This is how slow failures fool us. A bridge does not need to fall today to be dying. A debt does not need to ruin you this month to be fatal. Some disasters move so slowly that they start to look normal. Pisa's disaster moved a millimeter a year, and a millimeter is easy to ignore. Give it 500 years and it becomes a countdown. Legend says a young professor named Galileo dropped 2 balls from its edge to prove that heavy and light objects fall together. The story comes from a single student writing years later, and historians doubt it ever happened. It hardly matters. The image is irresistible, the falling tower, teaching the world how things fall. By the 20th century, the lean had become the city's fortune. 1 million visitors a year came to stand in the square and hold up their palms for the same photograph. Nobody traveled to Pisa to see a straight tower. The mistake was the monument, which is exactly why, in 1934, a man who could not tolerate imperfection decided to fix it. Benito Mussolini reportedly considered the tower a stain on Italy's honor, a national embarrassment wobbling in front of the whole world. His engineers arrived with a plan of brutal simplicity. If the foundation is weak, make it heavy. They drilled 361 holes into the base and pumped in roughly 80 tons of liquid cement. The tower answered immediately. It sank deeper into the wet ground, and it leaned further. Sit with that. The first deliberate rescue in the tower's history made it worse. The patient did not need more weight. Weight was the disease. But it would take the world another half-century and a funeral to understand. There had been a warning decades earlier that everyone chose to forget. In 1902, the Great Bell Tower of St. Mark's in Venice, 1,000 years old, collapsed into its own square in a matter of moments. By some miracle, the only casualty was the caretaker's cat. Italy rebuilt it, called it Destiny, and moved on. Towers, it turned out, do not always announce their deaths. The second warning was not so merciful. It came on March 17, 1989, 200 kilometers from Pisa, in the city of Pavia. That morning, the civic tower of Pavia, a medieval bell tower, younger cousin to Pisa's, collapsed. No earthquake, no storm, no warning of any kind. It simply let go all at once and buried the street corner below in 4,000 tons of brick. 4 people died. Italy went cold. Because if Pavia could fall without warning, what about the tower that was already tilted 5.5 degrees? The one with 1 million tourists a year climbing its spiral stairs. Engineers loaded the numbers into computer models, and the models came back with a horror story. The Tower of Pisa was, mathematically, past its limit. By the physics of masonry, it should already be rubble. One heavy rainstorm softening the ground, one strong gust at the wrong moment, one small shift, and 14,000 tons of marble would come down in seconds. On January 7, 1990, for the first time in 800 years, the tower was closed. The bells were silenced so their vibration could not tickle the structure. Buildings in its shadow were evacuated, and the strangest engineering committee of the century, led by a soft-spoken soil specialist from London named John Burland, was given a job nobody wanted: save the world's most famous mistake without straightening it. Burland's committee would spend 11 years on the problem, and its members reportedly joked that the tower had one more trick than they had meetings. Their first moves were humiliatingly crude. 600 tons of lead ingots stacked on the north side of the base like sandbags, just to counterlean the tower while they thought. Tourist postcards of white marble now featured a heap of gray metal. The purists howled. But it worked, barely. For the first time in living memory, the lean slowed. Then, in September 1995, they nearly killed it. The plan was elegant. Freeze the ground with liquid nitrogen. Drill in steel anchors, attach cables, an invisible harness replacing the ugly lead. But the freezing water expanded, and when it thawed, the ground let go. On the night of September 7th, the tower lurched south. In a few dark hours, it moved further than it normally moved in a year. Alarms, emergency meetings, more lead, 300 extra tons thrown onto the pile in a panic. Burland would call that autumn a season of, in his words, extraordinary close shaves. The team called the night itself Black September. Twice now, human intervention had brought the tower closer to death than 8 centuries of leaning ever had. Concrete made it sink. Freezing made it lurch. Every attempt to add something, whether weight, ice, or steel, had backfired. If this story has its hooks in you, take 1 second. Subscribe. This channel exists to decode exactly this kind of forgotten engineering, because what comes next is the part nobody expected, the rescue that worked by doing the opposite of everything before it. Burland's winning idea removed material instead of adding it. The logic was almost childishly simple. The tower leans south because the south side sank. You cannot push a 14,000-ton tower back upright. But what if you let the north side sink too? Just a little, just enough, so the tower settles backward on its own. Under the north edge of the foundation, the team pushed 41 drilling tubes, angled like drinking straws, into the earth. Through them, slowly, carefully, they extracted soil, a few liters at a time, never more than the instruments allowed. The tower was wrapped in sensors reading its every breath, and a safety harness of steel cables stood ready to catch it if the ground surprised them one more time. After Black September, nobody trusted the ground. The extraction ran for 2 years. Every scoop of soil was a decision, every measurement a vote. Roughly 70 cubic meters in total. In Burland's own words, about 2 truckloads of dirt removed from beneath the heaviest problem in Europe. $30 million, 11 years of committees, the finest geotechnical minds alive, and the winning move weighed less than the pile of lead they had stacked as a stopgap. And the tower moved. Grain by grain, season by season, it leaned back toward the north. No jacks, no cables pulling, just gravity gently lowering it into the space they had opened. Over 2 years, the top of the tower traveled back 45 centimeters. The lean shrank from 5.5 degrees to just under 4, the angle it had held in 1838. They had rewound 2 centuries of falling. On December 15, 2001, after 11 years and some $30 million, the tower reopened to the public. The bells rang again over the square, and in 2008, after a final round of extraction, the committee announced something no engineer in 8 centuries had ever been able to say. The Leaning Tower of Pisa had stopped moving. For the first time in its entire existence, it was still. Current estimates give it at least another 200 years, and the measurements since have revealed one last surprise. The tower is now straightening, ever so slightly, on its own, as the compressed ground beneath it keeps settling. The patient is not just stable, it is healing. But the strangest discovery came later, and it changes the whole story. In 2018, engineers from the University of Bristol and Roma Tre put a question to their models that nobody had seriously asked. This tower stands in earthquake country. It has been shaken by at least 4 strong quakes since 1280. Fragile, tilted, top-heavy. Why is it still here? The answer was the soil. The same soft, treacherous, waterlogged ground that tilted the tower also cushions it. When the earth shakes, the clay absorbs the violence, and the tower sways gently instead of cracking, a phenomenon engineers call soil-structure interaction. And Pisa turns out to be one of the purest examples on the planet. Read that again. The flaw that nearly destroyed it is the armor that preserved it, and it explains the pattern that runs through this whole story. 800 years of leaning never killed the tower because the lean and the ground had reached their own slow understanding, a truce written in clay and marble. What nearly killed it every single time was a confident hand reaching in to correct it. Cement in 1934, ice in 1995. The tower did not need to be fixed, it needed to be understood. That is why the rescue that finally worked looked so unimpressive from the outside. No cranes, no jacks, no drama. Just people who had finally learned to listen to the ground before touching it. The soft ground caused the lean and swallowed the earthquakes. The wars that interrupted construction compressed the soil and saved the foundation. Even the lean itself made the tower famous enough that no one would ever let it fall. Every defect in the long run defended it, and every attempt to erase a defect, Mussolini's concrete, the frozen anchors, nearly finished it off. The people who finally saved the tower understood this. They could have kept extracting soil, degree by degree, until the tower stood perfectly straight. The engineering was proven. It was on the table. They refused. The rescue was designed to stop at 4 degrees, to save the lean along with the tower. As the mayor of Pisa put it, the tower was born leaning, and leaning it shall remain. Think about what that means. In 1934, Italy was ashamed of the tilt and tried to cure it. In 2001, Italy spent $30 million and 11 years of its finest engineering to make absolutely sure the tilt survived. The mistake did not just build the monument. The mistake is the monument. The only reason you have heard of a mid-sized bell tower in a mid-sized Italian town, and the reason a young sergeant in 1944, with a dozen guns awaiting his word, looked through his binoculars at the enemy's observation post and could not bring himself to destroy it. Perfection would have been shelled without a second thought. So here is the question we leave you with. Everyone has a flaw they have spent years trying to fix. Some of them really do need fixing, but some of them are load-bearing. Some of them are the exact thing holding you up, absorbing the earthquakes, making you impossible to forget. Which of your flaws turned out to be armor? Tell us in the comments and tell us which impossible structure we should decode next. Subscribe, and we will see you inside the next mistake.